Hello, everybody. Happy Hump Day and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Sophie Bateman. Morning, Sophie.
Morning.
Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to ask yourselves, what would Jesus do? So what have we got for you today? Well, speaking of which, about Jesus, our first story is the resignation yesterday of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, after a church petition calling for his head gathered 5,000 signatures. Now, that followed a leaked report which showed that a prolific child abuser called John Smythe could have been made to face justice before he died had Welby acted on information that he had received more than a decade ago about this man who was running Christian summer camps. Now, Sophie, can you take us through this a little bit? Because yesterday morning, the news was reporting that Welby saw no reason to resign and wasn't going anywhere. He put out a statement to that effect. What do you think changed between then and, well, probably, towards the end of the day? He just decided that now he did have to go.
I mean, I think it's that classic comm strategy, isn't it, of just deny that there's any problem until the problem really does become just too insurmountable to do anything but resign. Keir Starmer was asked yesterday if he was going to back Justin Welby, and he quite pointedly refused to say that he would, and that may have been the final nail in the coffin. I'm not too sure. But he certainly had sort of, I think, lost the support of a lot of the church and sort of lost that mandate to remain. That report was fairly damning in the fact that he had known about this abuse as early as 2013 and simply had not taken the steps to follow up on whether any kind of justice was going to be done for the victims. And I think that is just something that you really do struggle to come back from reputation-wise as the head of C of E.
Yeah, well, as anything, I'd have thought, as the vicar of your local church, if you knew that someone was a child abuser and didn't do anything about it, then there's questions to be answered, aren't there, clearly? What do you think, everybody? Is there anyone watching this who is particularly bothered about the going or comings of the Church of England? Fewer than 6% of British adults say they attend a church, but it is nevertheless a really big part of the national conversation. Lots of people do believe and don't go to church, and lots of people do still listen to what the priesthood have to say. It's kind of like the nation's moral conscience in a way. Steve says, if Welby knew, then you can be sure others did. He's a token offering when there should be many more being investigated. So what happened was John Smythe was a barrister who ran a series of Christian summer camps, which were part of the whole sort of, ethos and institution of the church. And it drew a very large number of people over many years to attend these camps. They were people who were supposed to be being sort of spotted and groomed, if you like, for positions in the church. Around 30 boys at that, were teenagers, were beaten very badly over many years by Smythe. And Welby was a dormitory supervisor for part of that time. Now, there are many people involved in those camps, and there is no reason to think that any of the other people who were there, A, knew about it, B, could have done anything about it, or indeed that most people who attended were victims. There's a relatively or comparatively small proportion, 30 of them were thought to have been victims. Some of those taking part must have known, but not all by any means. Now, Welby was told in 2013 that police had had a report about Smythe, that they'd been informed of it. He says that he assumed that meant it was being dealt with and he didn't need to do any more. In fact, it had not been reported to the police, and had Welby followed up on that assertion, he would have found out that it hadn't gone to the police, and then it could have been reported and he could have faced justice before he died a few years ago. As it was, Smythe was moved on to a couple of countries in Africa where he set up very similar boys' camps, all part of the Christian Union, the Anglican Union rather. And where boys carried on being abused, and about another 100, it's thought. In one case, a boy was found dead at his home. He was finally caught after being confronted by journalists, but he died before he could face trial. Now, Sophie, this is disturbing for all kinds of reasons, not the least being, as Steve rightly points out there, getting rid of Welby does not fix the central problem, which is that there was a church that didn't stop this offending, didn't spot it, didn't catch it, didn't really react properly to it when it was found. How does that get solved? Because it's certainly not with an archbishop resigning, is it?
No, it certainly isn't. And I think it's quite tempting to fall into the narrative of this sort of ceremonial, almost sort of a bloodletting in which, the person at the top takes the hit essentially. They step down, they shoulder, the majority of the blame for that. And other people can just sort of brush it off and say, well, the guy who was responsible has taken accountability and he's gone now. But, there were, I think, at least 11 bishops that were named in that report, and they all knew about the abuse and they all failed to stop him. Which, if there are 11 bishops involved, that means, dozens and dozens of other possibly lower ranking members of the church also knew about it. And I think it's just going to be a very long and quite painful process of, first of all, deciding how they even go about it. Obviously, the perpetrator has been dead now for a number of years, but his many, many victims are still alive and still suffering with the consequences of that abuse. And, how does the church go about making amends for that? I think that's a really, really tough question.
Exactly. Leslie says, it brings into question every religious belief. None of them can say that they're completely clean and justified in some of the things that they do. And what do you think, everybody? Do you think this is just, yet another church religious abuse scandal? There seems to be a theme there across more than one faith or sect. Steve says it talks about a powerful body covering up the truth. Where have I heard that before? Same with nuclear veterans. Now, one of Smythe's victims says in the paper today that the only solution for this is for the church to stop protecting itself and start putting people first. That's the quote. Jesus would probably agree with that if he was knocking about, I think. But with a massive institution that has, over 2,000 years, it's become a fundamental part of the British state. It is connected to the monarchy and to government and to the legislature, to parliament, to everything else. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the vicar of the national parish church, if you like. He conducts all our marriages and births and deaths that are in the royal family, the central parish church, the central sort of story of our nation in a way. And he also sort of acts as a moral conscience. They're in the Houses of Parliament. They raise issues about stuff. Welby was very vocal about austerity and the effects of some conservative policies, particularly Rwanda. And that applies to many, many other people in the world as well outside this country. Are they really, do you think, are going to put that institution second? When an institution's that big, Sophie, can it ever really put people first?
I think that is probably unlikely, but I am not a religious person and not a member of the CFE, so I will leave that to other people who might know a little bit more about that, but it does seem unlikely. It's
plainly up to them, and it does also seem that the new Archbishop of Canterbury, whoever that may be, is going to have a lot of work to do, which I'm pretty certain, I think, was said when Welby took over as well. The one thing I suppose is interesting is there's talk that maybe you might have a female Archbishop of Canterbury after this. There are a few bishops in the running. 2 of them are women. So if they did that, that would obviously be really powerful statement for lots of different reasons, and you can bet your bottom dollar that parts of the Anglican Church elsewhere in the world would be really unhappy about the whole situation because they still don't like women priests in other bits of the world. So messy. Have to see how that goes. But we want to go on to the main story of the day, and also a matter of conscience and responsibility, I suppose. Yesterday in Parliament, there was an extraordinary press conference whereby journalists and politicians were given the detail of a new bill on assisted dying or assisted suicide, depending on what you want to call it, which is being introduced by Kim Ledbetter, who's pictured there. She's the sister of Joe Cox. She has got a private member's bill, which she was first out of the hat for the private member's bill, so there's a good chance this will get onto the statute books. Now, there are reports of people sort of crammed into MPs' offices, sitting cross-legged on the floor, everyone firing questions, everybody else. It does seem very, very packed in there yesterday. But what did we kind of get, Sophie, out of it in terms of the detail? It's not just, assisted dying bill they're voting on. There's huge numbers of clauses and safeguards and the ways it's going to work. So what actually is the suggestion on the table?
So I think it's about 38 pages long, and they'll have about a couple of weeks to review it, and the MPs are going to finally vote on it on November 29th. They haven't given a free vote, and Keir Starmer said he won't be pressuring them either way. He's kept his cards pretty close to his chest about which way he's inclined to vote on assisted dying, but basically it's a proposal to change the law, which will allow mentally competent, is the phrase, mentally competent, terminally ill adults with 6 months or less to live to end their lives. And there is a whole host of sort of safeguards. There to be eligible, the person must be over 18, they must be a resident of England and Wales and registered with a GP for at least 12 months. They must have the mental capacity to make that choice, which I think is quite a key phrase in terms of how that is going to be sort of adjudicated. Kim Leadbetter is quite clear that she wants this to be a very sort of carefully phrased piece of legislation if it does pass into law. There's sort of step-by-step process in which the person must express the sort of clear and informed wish to end their lives totally free of coercion or pressure. They have to make, I believe, 2 separate declarations of their wish to end their life. That must be witnessed and signed. There must be 2 independent doctors involved in the process to make sure that they're eligible. And the application does actually have to go before a High Court judge who has to hear from the doctors and question the person making the application and anyone else they consider appropriate. And then there's a period of 7 days between the 2 doctors making their assessments. And so it is a very sort of, if it went through to law, it would be a process. It wouldn't be any kind of like quick decision, which I think a lot of critics of the bill were sort of quite wary of. And I think it's interesting that Kim Leadbetter said that I think fewer than 1,000 people a year across the whole of England and Wales would ever be expected to actually choose an assisted death if it became law. So it is a very specific and quite tight set of restrictions on who could actually opt for euthanasia in that specific context.
And some of the objections are about the word expected. So Kim Leadbetter was talking about an estimate of how the people thought would take up the offer if it was there. But some people would suggest that people are going to have some kind of, even if unspoken, an implicit pressure on them that there is this option should you wish to take it. You're expensive and getting in the way. Leslie says, as someone who could be placed in a situation, I hope the safeguards are really put into place. When it comes to my time, I want to be sure that my decisions are taken into account. I think, Leslie, frankly, anyone could be put in that situation. And it may well be that people with chronic conditions today feel that they're a bit closer to that. But everyone is going to die at some point. And we all got to die something. And they're not really all nice things to die of. The only way to do it quickly, I think, is probably taking a lot of other people with you at the same time. So it's not a good idea. Now, there are a couple of points that I want to raise, Sophie. So it's got to be signed off by 2 doctors that you see 7 days apart, who both confirm that you have less than 6 months to live and that you are fully compos mentis and the rest of it. But it's also going to be signed off by a High Court judge. Does that not mean that whoever wants to die has to be able to pay the court fees for the High Court, which means effectively rich people are going to get to die painlessly and poor people aren't?
Well, that's one of the arguments about the current setup of suicide laws in this country, is that it's a very 2-tiered system in which people who reach the end of their lives and decide that they would rather take that timing into their own hands are able to travel to Switzerland to go to the Dignitas clinic. But the vast majority of people who find themselves in that situation are going to, their family and friends get kind of forced into very emotionally and morally thorny territory, and which is how you see people end up risking charges for murder or manslaughter for, helping one of their loved ones end their life when they choose to. So again, by introducing the sort of High Court into this, you do introduce a sort of possible wealth barrier. So it doesn't seem to do anything to really readdress the kind of class-based divide that suicide laws in this country are already quite wrapped up in.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea of having like a crowdfunder so you can go and ask a judge to kill yourself is...
That is the grimmest possible...
Yeah, Richard says, will it reduce medical research? If we can just clear terminal conditions away, what would be the point in trying to cure them or fix them? And he's raised his point here as well that about morphine tabs. So morphine is one of the painkillers that many, many people have towards the end of their lives. And it's something you become increasingly used to and therefore becomes increasingly less effective. And so therefore you need more and more of it to get the same pain relief. And many, many patients have on their death certificate as one of their causes of death will be morphine overdose. And that's not because they've killed themselves with morphine. It's because the amount of morphine required to keep them at peace and pain-free is also enough to kill them. And that is an accepted, normal part of dealing with end-of-life care in this country. Some people are given morphine tabs, as Richard said, and do that to themselves, and are able to sort of up their pain relief as and when they need. But we do have the situation where sometimes people are just so desperate and it ends up being a pillow over the face or something where you have to go and talk to a police officer about it. And if you do want to end your own life, you don't want that to happen to your loved ones, and you don't want that to be really the end. One other point in there, Sophie, is that this is obviously about adults, people over the age of 18. There are going to be many parents, possibly some watching this programme, who have seen children die, and sometimes in a great deal of pain and agony, and in a way that seems incredibly unfair and unreasonable. At some point, someone is going to say, please, could someone end my child's life a bit sooner and a bit more kindly than this? That is a horrible place for any of us to be in, isn't it?
Yeah, I can see that opening up a really, really difficult can of worms, as there is in any legislation where there's a specific, hard cutoff age issue. There's always going to be exceptions to the rule, whether that's by a year or by more than a few years. And when it's essentially dying children and their parents, I think that is, you can't really get a more emotive issue than that. I do think it's interesting that in the response to this proposed bill, I think it's fair to say that most people in this country do seem to be in agreement that if you are terminally ill and in a lot of pain, you should have the right to end your life. In my experience, there seems to be very few people who disapprove of euthanasia purely on ideological grounds, such as, their belief in the sanctity of human life. I believe the Justice Secretary, she's one of very few who have actually come out and said that they won't be voting for the bill because of her own belief in the sanctity of human life. It does seem to be that most critics, including Wes Streeting, who is probably the most vocal opponent of the bill, their criticism is very much coming from the practicalities of how do you make sure that someone is making an informed decision and not being pressured by a family member or by their own sense of...
A lot of the history of euthanasia, there's a lot of stuff tied up with eugenics and with the Nazis as well. That's how that euthanasia and ending people's lives, especially the disabled in particular, was how the Holocaust began. It gave the Nazis their method of practicing in order to then develop methods of mass death, which led eventually to the gas chambers and Jewish Holocaust. So it's sticky and messy and horrible. And as our viewer just there was saying, when it comes to yourself, you want to die without that pain. But when it comes to other people, you do start to wonder, well, do they have to? Do they need to? Is it being properly checked? And one of the things that there's been some concerns about, particularly where it's been introduced in other countries, is kind of legislative creep. So the fact that, although, yes, you have this law right now that limits it this much, only these people can take their own lives and only for these reasons, it's going to be this safe. But that then you open it up to the possibility of legal appeals, judicial reviews. And in some other countries, that has led to far more people being taken into that potential net, if you like, including people who just have chronic conditions. They're not going to die, but they're not happy with the way they live their lives. They can't cope anymore.
And there have been a couple of high-profile cases in, I believe, Canada might be one, and a couple of other European countries in which people who don't have a physical illness, but they have chronic depression lasting a very long time, or a mental illness that really does make them feel as if their suffering is at a level that they don't want to continue with. And that's another, I think, really difficult consideration that this kind of law might end up forcing into sort of the public sphere.
Yeah, and we also had, not within living memory, very few years ago, governments that were talking about how much it costs for people who have long-term sick, who are disabled, not to be in work. Yeah, and the benefits that they require and the grants that they need and how much it costs to run their wheelchairs and things like this. So it's the kind of debate that does raise an awful lot of concerns. Interested to know what you think about this, everybody, because it's such a nuanced debate. There's so much on all sides, and it needs to be, I think it's on us as journalists to make it as fair and as balanced as possible, because the nation's going to be talking about this as well as Parliament. Now, in the paper today, there's an interview with Alistair Thompson of a campaign group called Care Not Killing. And he quite reasonably points out that palliative care, end-of-life care, and hospices are so badly underfunded and are not able to treat people the way they should and the way they could, that people who face dying in pain that they shouldn't have to have, and that may be something that they therefore opt for assisted dying. They should be having better resources put into end-of-life care, palliative care, and then we wouldn't have to be doing this, is his argument. I mean, he's saying, Sophie, you know, that this is a bill people have to vote against because it actually takes resources out of healthcare. Mm.
It's a very, very grim way to look at it, is the sort of zero-sum cost of, you know, is it cheaper at the end of the day, in the cold, hard light of day, is it cheaper to end a life than it is to prolong it? It's a really, really horrible question.
By that token, I think we all get strangled the moment we leave the work because we're all just a net cost, aren't we? And we're just
the economy must come first.
It's sticky. It's a very, very nuanced debate now. As Sophie said, Parliament has a free vote. Politicians will be voting according to their conscience. Most of them do have one. Don't often see it, but appreciate it if at least they display one to you. And I think it's something that we're going to be talking about more as well. Now, we do have some good news in the world for you, a slightly happier tone, and here it is. Now, a quiet cul-de-sac in Halifax, West Yorkshire is well behaved at the best of times, but you could forgive it for getting a bit chaotic when 200 people turn up out of the blue overnight in order to catch a glimpse of the rare red tanager spotted on a washing line. Now, as you can see from this picture, not on podcast, but if you're watching online, you can see that is a yellow bird, not a red bird. That's because it's the female of the species. The male is the red one. It comes from the Americas. It seems to have got blown off course by a hurricane on the other side of the Atlantic. And it's probably sat there wondering where the hell Halifax is and how to get back. Now, but what's wonderful here is a comment at the bottom of that story by a retired nurse called Jan Patchett, who lives in the cul-de-sac, who said, there must be 200 bird watchers here. They're very quiet. You wouldn't know they're out there. Because there is this amazing, massive flash mob that's turned up out of the blue, and it's not all very, very quiet because they all want to see the bird. Sophie, is this proof that if you're all acting in each other's best interests, that everybody benefits in the long run?
Oh, I see what you did there, and I think you're absolutely right. I think this is an extremely wholesome hobby that we should be encouraging possibly more young men and women to be taking up.
More bird watching.
More bird watching.
Music on your iPhone out loud without your earphones in. Not helpful to the general state of the world. Right, thank you very much, Sophie, for taking us through all that. Thank you, everyone, for taking part and for your lovely, thoughtful, nuanced questions as well on the topic of assisted dying. There'll be Prime Minister's questions at 12 o'clock today. They'll be back on these channels, so come back and watch those. But until then, we will see you, I think, next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Or maybe not, actually. I think next Monday is actually going to be cancelled because I'm going to be doing something else. And Wednesday as well, maybe. But we'll be back here as soon as we can. Anyway, we have a big documentary coming out about nuclear test veterans, which is going to air next Wednesday on BBC Two at 9 p.m. called Britain's Nuclear Bomb Scandal, Our Story. It's something that I've been working on very hard, based a lot of it on the Mirror's investigation of the nuke blood scandal over the past couple of years. And so Monday and Wednesday next week, I think I'm doing an awful lot of publicity for it, and I'll be on various breakfast sofas, so I can't be here. But keep tuned, and we'll try and keep you updated about that and other things as much as possible. In the meantime, next Wednesday, watch BBC Two at 9 o'clock. And I will see you all again when I see you right here on the News Agenda Explained. Thanks, Sophie. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay safe. Take care. Tatty bye.